There was plenty of speculation around the Portland Trailblazers this summer, plenty of talks about a trade, plenty of expectations of there being a trade between one of their two guards, CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, after another early playoff exit. But ultimately, they are still both on the roster, as well as bringing back Norman Powell, continuing to run the three-guard lineup, and trying to run it back and see if they can have more success with this group, because for some reason, they apparently think that Dame and CJ can find something better this year. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about the Portland Trailblazers, what I think about this group for the upcoming season, and what level of success I think they can have. If you do go on to enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the Portland Trailblazers. So as mentioned, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are still on the roster. Norman Powell has been re-signed. He is now a long-term piece of this group as well, or at least his contract will be there alongside CJ's for a potential trade if any Ben Simmons talks or any other trade does occur. And Robert Covington and Yusuf Nurkic remain to round out the starting lineup, resulting in the same starting lineup as they ended the season with last year. The only thing that has really changed for this group is the bench. The only rotational piece for the bench that is the same, who will play regular minutes, is Anthony Simons. Nazir Little will also probably get some minutes here and there as well, who is still a member of the team. But outside of that, Dennis Smith Jr. has been added, Quinn Cook, Ben McLemore, Tony Snell, Larry Nance, and Cody Zeller, alongside Patrick Patterson. But ultimately, the bench is not the problem for Portland. Sure, is Larry Nance Jr. a nice addition and will he help them on defense? Yeah, he will. Will Tony Snell give them a little bit of wing defense and three-point ability? Yeah, sure. Will Ben McLemore give them a little bit of scoring off the bench? Yeah, sure, but they also lost Carmelo Anthony, so you're not really gaining any scoring off of the bench when you lost Melo and you're trying to replace it with Ben McLemore. Like, it's something, sure, but your bench already got worse anyways, so you're not really gaining anything there. So ultimately, this team hasn't really changed much at its core. The core group is still the same. They've just rotated and changed a few pieces on the bench, which is fine. And I like some of the moves they've made. I think Tony Snell was a good add. I think Dennis Smith Jr. gives them some good depth at point guard that I thought especially was needed when it was unsure whether Damian Lillard was going to be traded or not. And I think the Larry Nance addition was a good add for them because I don't think Derrick Jones Jr. was being used as he should be for this team. And hopefully they can use Larry Nance Jr. properly and he can have an important role on this group. And hopefully Nazir Little can have a better year this year as well and have a more important role or impactful role on this team. But ultimately, this is just more of the same from Portland. Sure, Norman Powell is now on the team, but Norman Powell does not fix any of their problems, and this is why I found the Norman Powell trade to be so weird for Portland. And as a Raptors fan, it was one of the last places I expected Norman Powell to go. Portland didn't need more scoring, and they still don't need more scoring. They have Dame and they have CJ, and now they have Norm. Portland's problem is not offense. They always have a good offense. It's their defense. Their defense is not good. Damian Lillard is not a good defender. CJ McCollum is not a good defender. And despite the optimism and the feedback that I've received from some people in Portland media or Portland fans, Norman Powell is not an amazing defender, especially at small forward. He's not big. And so him being your small forward, you can't have him guard the primary guard because that means then you have to throw CJ or Dame on a small forward, which just doesn't work. Like Norman Powell's 6'3". He is not able to defend small forwards. He just can't. And so sure, Norman Powell can be a good defender when he applies himself, but that's not often. And sure, he can do it more on this Portland team now that his offense isn't needed as much, but at the end of the day, Norman Powell's not some amazing defender. He's better, but better than Dame and CJ is not saying much. So ultimately, I love Norman Powell. He's one of my favorite Raptors to have played in this era since we've been good, ultimately. But at the end of the day, Norman Powell is not some amazing defender. He was earlier on in his career, but he does still have mental lapses. He's not an amazing defender. He's a fine defender, but you can argue that he's not even that against small forwards. He's just not what they need. They have Dame, they have CJ. They have Norm. They have great scoring in their backcourt. Absolutely brilliant scoring. But outside of that, they just don't have the defense required to be good enough with an offense that is really good, but not great. They're not a Brooklyn Nets level of offense. They're not a Denver Nuggets level of offense. But yet their defense is worse than those teams. That's just not a recipe for success. Because they have three guys that are all small, that aren't great defenders, because Robert Covington isn't anywhere near as good as advertised. He isn't as good as he was a few years ago when he was with Houston, when he was with Minnesota. He's still a fine player, but he is much better as an off-ball defender now than he is an on-ball defender. He gets in the passing lanes well, he's disruptive, he can block shots. He's still a very good defender. That's not any diss against Robert Covington. He's still a very good defender, but he is not anywhere near as good as what he used to be. Yusuf Nurkic hasn't been able to get back to the high level of play he had before his injury, where he was as a borderline all-star. He just hasn't reached anywhere near those levels since, and has not been integrated to that level in the offense either. And then their bench is just fine. It's fine, but it's nothing special. And ultimately, they just have a result in a team that's fairly good on the offensive end, poor on the defensive end, an average bench at best, in my opinion, and a team that just is good in the regular season, can outscore you in enough games to get into the playoffs, and then ultimately is probably going to get bounced in the first round again, because unless they make a significant move with this roster, the Dame-CJ combination, in of itself, is not necessarily the problem. But the pieces that they have surrounding those players is a problem. If Chris Middleton is there instead of Norman Powell, we speak completely differently about this team. If Jeremy Grant is there instead of Norman Powell, we speak completely differently about this team. Now, especially in the Jeremy Grant comparison, that's not a player that is absurdly different in terms of the salary he is getting paid. In fact, it's pretty darn close. But ultimately, their roles that they can play for this team is completely different. If you have someone that can get you a bucket on the wing while also being able to defend, this roster looks much different and their defense looks much different. But ultimately, they don't have that. They have Norman Powell, who's 6'3", and is not an amazing defender, alongside two poor defenders in Dame and CJ. If you're going to have Dame and CJ as your backcourt, you need to have good defenders around them at pretty much all times. Because if you can't defend well against guards on the perimeter, then your wing defenders need to be very good. So then at least you know you have a bit of security on your perimeter, and you need to have an extremely good rim protecting center. They have good defenders in Nurkic, a fairly good one, to above average one, to great one, Robert Covington, although I'd argue not great anymore, and then Norman Powell, who is probably not even average. And that's what they're left with. And so unless Larry Nance picks up a bigger role, Covington slides back to the 3, which I just don't think is likely, and maybe you see Norm off of the bench, which I don't think is likely at all, then ultimately I just don't think this group has the personnel as of right now to be anything more than a team that gets into the playoffs and gets bounced in the first round. I think they do get in the playoffs, but I think they get bounced in the first round. Unless they make a change or a move with this roster, that's ultimately the ceiling I see for this Portland Trailblazers group. But let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about this Portland Trailblazers group, what you expect for them for the upcoming season. And if you want to hear some other season previews from me before we get into the NBA season, then be sure to click the box on the right-hand side of the screen. That being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.